All right, looks like we're live. Hi, I'm Meg. Welcome to Art During the Quarantine. Today is day 17. Wild, wild times we live in here. Welcome. If you're just joining me for the first time, I'm glad to have you here. Welcome to my house. If you don't know who I live in Madrid, Spain. I'm an art teacher here. And since the quarantine kind of happened, I've been filming videos for my students because I miss them dearly. And also because art abroad is a difficult thing. And art online is a difficult thing. So this kind of takes place and helps supplement some of my classes. And I thought, why not share it with you? So today we are going to be doing some really fun things. We're going to be doing light, dark shape paintings or drawings. And I'm excited about them because the principles are pretty simple, but execution is without a hitch, and the end product is super rewarding. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I also I'm doing an artist Q&A, which is fun. I've never done this before, but I asked you guys for some questions that you had about art or anything art related, and we'll be answering those as we're together. Hi, Rebecca. Oh, this is so fun. So first off, let me show you the materials you need, and then I'll get you started on a project and I'll start answering some questions. So here is our future, fam, right here. We are going to be doing a series of shapes all around our entire paper, and then I'll show you how to divide up the spaces and then color and fill space accordingly. So what you need to start off is a blank piece of paper, A4, US letter, anything works. You're going to need a pencil. I have a baby ruler, but if you have a 12-inch ruler, or I don't know what the equivalent is in centimeters here. I don't know how large their rulers are in Europe, but one that's taller than your paper, you're going to need that. And a marker, black marker, and I think that's it. Today's pretty simple. So let me get you started on the shape drawing portion of this project, and then we'll dive into some questions. So here we go. Grab your paper out. See, I want to make sure you can see everything I'm doing here. Essentially what I'm going to do is take my ruler, and I'm going to start by just simply making geometric shapes all around my paper, overlapping them so that there's balance overall within the piece, making at least one or two quite large and then others to kind of pile around. So I'm going to start off here with a couple different shapes, and then we will get going on questions. I've got family from the US tuning in. Hello, hello. I miss you and love you. And I've got friends from Spain literally just blocks from me that I just can't see right now, which is just the saddest thing. Yeah, it's been wild. We got an email yesterday saying that schools in Madrid have officially been closed until the end of April. So these are bizarre times. Yes, we never imagined it would go too much farther, but if you've seen any of the news recently, you know it's not been a positive thing here in Spain. So I guess we need more time to wait this one out. I don't know. Praying just for healing. In the last couple of days, I've heard about a lot of people I know personally who are super ill, and so doing art is a great way to kind of reflect and be in prayer for them. Great. So as you can see here, I'm just kind of overlapping triangles. I've got this sort of like warped trapezoid form, and I'm allowing the tips of each of the shapes to kind of connect, but I'm not really doing any math. I'm not like doing specific measurements by any means. I'm just kind of dividing it up with whatever shapes I feel like could be kind of fun. So I love this project because you can truly do any shape or form, and it always looks awesome at the end. So if you're doing it with me and you're like, is this right? You're probably doing great. Yeah, so there's been a lot of prayer going on in our house the last few days, especially last night. Heard some news of some dear friends that are sick, and that is just always, it's always hard no matter where you are, I think, but especially when you can't leave your house to help or anything, I think it can be a very difficult situation. Okay, so there is this. I'm just kind of dividing up this paper here and getting these shapes sort of assorted. Got a sort of assorted there. That was nice. Here we go. I've got a couple larger shapes. Now I'm just going to kind of sprinkle in a couple smaller shapes around here, and then we'll go and do a question or two. So I can remember one off the bat. I put them on my phone so I could see them. And if you have other ones, you can throw them in the comments here too. But the first one is, let's see, who has inspired your artistic expression? And give us a famous artist and a professor. Ooh, that's a really good question. Okay, so I think for me, it totally depends the medium. If we're talking about like clay, because I'm a potter, I'd probably pick Lucy Ree. She does just some of these beautiful forms. She's just, let me tell you, I love her. I love Lucy Ree because she's this petite little woman and her pots are massive and she's also ripped. It's incredible. She's totally phenomenal. I just don't even, I love it. She's also like, I think my grandma's age. So she rocks out. She's my hero. And her forms are gorgeous. So that's probably the like professional artist that I would say I admire. And then a professor from college, man. There are two profs that immediately come to mind. But honestly, I admire all of the professors that I had in college. They all had such different styles, and I loved the way that they approached their work. But I think the first one that comes to mind is Cherith Lundeen because her work. I always felt like she's a painter. I always felt like her work and my work, like I'm a 3D person and she's a 2D person. They're like cousins. I just felt like we were thinking about a lot of the same ideas at the same time. And I could really relate to a lot of the pieces that she created. She inspires me. So here, just a little checkpoint here in between some questions. These are the shapes that I got. I'm probably going to add one or two over here to do a couple more overlaps, and we're looking good. I'll show you paper again while I answer this next one. So the next question talks about how do you express art in ways that are not necessarily on paper? Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I'm a musician, so I write music in my free time, and I'm working on some music projects right now. So in my free time, I'd say when I'm not, let's see, not necessarily on paper. That's probably, even though I do put it on paper technically, with music, what's that famous quote? We paint on silence or whatever. Yeah, I would say for sure with music. And then obviously clay is not paper. So I would say clay is my cop out there. And potters sort of cop out. I feel like just claim clay and you're good to go. Yeah, so that's probably the first thing I'd answer for that question. I've been getting into watercolors recently, which has been just a joy. Okay, so here's my paper. We're looking really good. How far are you guys? You doing well? You okay? Here is where we're at. I feel like we've got a really nice balance of a couple main forms, like larger forms that take up a lot of space, and then we've got these like almost daggers that kind of jet in and say, look at me, which is part of why I love this project. It turns out different every single time. So what I'm gonna show you now, we are gonna divide this paper into 4 quadrants. As you can see on the example, I kind of just showed you earlier, you can't see the quadrants when we're done, but those quadrants will direct the way that you direct light into your piece. So they actually couldn't be more important. So knowing where those lines are is going to be critical. So watch carefully, and then you can decide where you'd like to slice up your pizza on your paper. Okay, so I don't even have a ruler long enough to match my paper here, so I'm gonna actually use the side of my notebook to make sure. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pick an angle that goes against and kind of cuts through my paper along the side like this. So I'm gonna go like this. I'm just gonna take the side of my notebook, make sure my pencil's long enough here, draw my line. This is what I have so far. There's that. Sorry, I'm seeing your comments. Sorry you can't see. Just like that. Sliced it about in half if I were to warp it a little bit this way. So there's the paper so far. And then what I'm going to do is almost like a pinwheel. I'm going to rotate my paper 90 degrees, and I'm going to create a line from this corner to the bottom of this corner so that I have sort of these four warped quadrants along my paper. Hope I got everybody to be able to see everything. Okay. All right. So again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'll show you. I'm using my sketchbook as my guide, and didn't even make it all the way, so we'll supplement here where necessary. Cool. So here's what I've got so far. I'll hold this up for a minute for you to catch up, and I'll answer another question. Let's see. How has, this is funny, how has being around stickers your entire life affected your art? So those of you that know me from Minnesota, my dad works for a company that produces labels. And so I grew up with like a sticker printer in my room and I would be like printing fun things. And I definitely think that impacted art making. I remember in 5th grade, I won like a sticker contest and I got to have my design printed on a sticker. And it was just like professionally, like at my dad's company. And I remember just being like super excited because my ideas were finally like realized in a way that was different than all my sketches and everything. And so I think in some ways, maybe it was a confidence booster and it kind of encouraged me to like pursue more of the design aspect of art. And to also see like how that works in real life. I think that was totally crazy. So, and super helpful, honestly. So, little fun fact. Here we are, we've got those quadrants divided up. Now what we're going to do is we are going to pick one quadrant and we are going to commit to this one until we have colored the whole thing. So pick your favorite to start off, and I'll show you how we're going to do it. So essentially, I'm going to pick, it's hard to see my quadrants, I'm going to pick this one closest to you. And what I'm going to do is decide whether my shapes are going to be filled in or the background is going to be filled in. And that will dictate the rest of our decisions. For me, I'm going to choose that the shapes are going to be filled in for this one because I think having this dynamic shape, this large shape that I have right here, filled in with black pigment is going to be really dynamic. So what I'm going to do is just grab that black marker that you have, and we're going to do what's called edging, which is essentially preparation for making sure all of your lines are nice and crisp. So I'm going to grab out that ruler again, and with my marker, I am going to trace back over the lines, allowing the marker to go on the inside of my shape. This time it's super important that each of these lines is on the inside of the shape because later it could be a little bit tricky to catch up. So again, I'm just going to rotate my shapes. If there's overlap, don't mark that with your marker yet. Just leave that blank for a second. Okay, so I'll show you this first shape. And oh man, this is where it gets tricky. It's like, where do these lines intersect? Okay, so this is where my quadrant ends, right here. So I am gonna draw this line. Okay, cool. And here, if the shape juts into this form, I'm gonna go on the outside of the shape. And we're gonna let the negative of the shape kind of take the stage. My ruler's making some marks. Maybe I'll just freehand it. That's probably what I'm gonna do. Okay. So what I'm gonna do now is, again, realizing where this line of division is, I am going to mark my paper so that this center shape, the shape that I have here, is completely filled in. So right now I'm continuing the edging process. And it's okay for this to take a little bit of time. Okay. Realizing where this line of division is, I am going to mark my paper so that this center shape, the shape that I have here, okay, let's see. Are we still live? Completely filled in. So right now I'm continuing the edging process. Some issues here. Ooh. Okay, hopefully we're still plugged in. Okay. Oh man, I'm gonna have to end this video or it's not working. Oh no, this is so sad. Okay, we still live? Oh my goodness, we're still here. I thought I lost you all. Thanks for your patience. Okay, my computer had like some weird glitch thing going on. Okay, so essentially what we're gonna do is continue that edging process and just kind of buddy up to that line of division that we drew and letting that marker kind of be your final say of this is where my shapes are, this is where they end. Just like that. Okay, cool. Now, this is probably the easiest part to do so far. We're gonna fill this entire thing in with this black marker. I find sometimes when, especially with these types of drawings, it's easier to fill in the shapes that we know and then come back and work on other areas of the drawing. Otherwise, it gets really confusing. Okay, good. Great. So while we're filling this in, I'm gonna look at another question. Let's see. Oh, this is a funny one. What's the best prank you've ever been a part of? Oh man, this one's not an art-related question. I think my dad asked this question. Let's see. Oh man, I feel like my type of humor is like small, like funny, weird jokes, like pun related generally. But I will say I did pull a prank in college, where a friend of mine and I planned a fake banquet and actually pulled the whole thing off. So because we weren't in sports at the time, and we were like, everyone's going to banquets. That sounds so fun. So we decided to plan our own, and we made it look super legit, and then we actually pulled it off. So that's probably the first thing that comes to mind is one of the pranks. But honestly, I feel like whenever I'm with my little brother, we pull out the funniest things. So I don't know if that's the first thing that comes to mind. Okay. Yeah. So while we're finishing this last shape, let me see what the next question is. Let's see. Oh, this is a good one. So this is a longer question, so I'm gonna finish this one before I answer. Otherwise, I'll lose my train of thought. I know myself. I got a couple questions from students, which I just love, and those are super important questions because that's why we're doing this. So before we do that, let's make sure we understand what shapes we've got so far. So hopefully, if you're with me, you have successfully colored in this first shape. Woohoo! It's black and beautiful. What we're gonna do is start to understand the rest of the shapes in this quadrant. So this is my quadrant. I have dodged a couple of these triangle daggers that we talked about earlier. And what we're gonna do is I'm gonna show you how to handle it when these shapes cross over each other, specifically near this line, because that can get really tricky. And I'm gonna kind of like ruin the secret. We're gonna change rules for every quadrant, which is why at the end it's gonna look super cool. So look close at my paper and we'll keep going here. So here we are. Again, we're at this top quadrant. This is my line right here. So what I'm gonna do is, again, because the shape goes over the line, I'm gonna fill in this shape with black, stopping at this border of this shape and simply treating it like a boundary. Like a boundary line, again, butting up to that line of division, and I'm gonna fill it in just as if it's a regular shape. And our eye automatically extends the bottom of this shape into this shape, no matter what. So you're really in the clear with that. Cool. So from here, this is the division I have. I only have one other shape right here, just a little smidgen in this very little corner. And let's see what else I got. I've got this one. Okay, cool. So I'll turn this towards you. Here is my line of division going horizontally across my paper. And I'm again just gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna do the edging on this shape. We'll drag it around. Remember, coloring from the tip of your pen towards the outside border and allowing the ink to go inside your form. It'll help keep it as clean as possible. Okay, cool. All right, so if you've made it this far, you finished the first quadrant. Woohoo! This is the smallest one, so I got a lot to go, but hopefully you picked a bigger one. Great. So again, it's a nice time to just clean up a couple of those lines. I had to ditch my ruler because it was leaving some marks on my paper, but hopefully yours is being more kind to you. Let's jump over into this quadrant over here, and we'll continue understanding some of these shapes, but we are gonna reverse the rules. So what's going to happen is, instead of coloring the inside of the shapes, now I'm going to be coloring the outside of the shapes. So what we're going to do is reverse edging. So just a minute ago, I preached to you that you take the edge of your marker and put it on the very outside of the line so that the ink goes on the inside of your form. Now the opposite is true. So we are going to take our pen and we are going to trace the outside of each of these forms, allowing all of the ink to go on the border of the shape. And then I'm actually going to edge the line of division as well, because we're going to be actually filling in the entire outside of these forms like this. Does that make sense so far? Are you feeling good? Great. So I'm going to continue that edging. Sometimes I find it's actually more helpful to edge for this specific version of the rule all the way around, because otherwise it's kind of tricky to know exactly like where the lines and shapes end. So sometimes the edging actually can be a helpful friend at the beginning for this rule. So I'm going to just kind of carve out some of these shapes using this beautiful black marker I've got going on here. And again, just kind of obeying that same principle, allowing the tip of my pen to hug the outside of the form. And then you can color in the background, whatever that means to you. Okay. Sweet. So again, I'm going to try to return to some of these questions while we're all doing this edging together. One of my students asked, how do you draw organic shapes so good? I'm able to draw simple things easily like plants and trees, but I'm unable to draw any animals. Do you have any suggestions? Ooh. So this is a really good question, and that's a funny question because, not funny because it's not right, but funny because I don't really consider myself a very good drawer. But I know I did take drawing classes in college and have to work at it for, my job. I think one of the best ways to get good at drawing something is through repetition. And for me, I'm not very good at taking like an image in front of me and then like translating that into like a two-dimensional surface. So sometimes what like is good training ground for that would be working from a picture of, especially if you wanted to draw animals, you said, working from a picture where a three-dimensional form has already been like half flattened for you. So you can put the picture in front of you and draw some of those forms. Sometimes what I do is doing that grid across a picture and then transferring that grid to your blank piece of paper so that you can kind of understand in maybe those quadrants how the form is made up. That's my first piece of advice. That or get a really, really still cat, one of the two, and then just draw them forever. So those are some of my first pieces of advice for that. If anything, I think there are a lot of people out there that are putting out some really cool videos of like how to draw certain animals. Another good way to go about it could also be like looking up a really cool photographer and following their work and then deciding that you're going to just try to draw some of the photos that they do. Don't try to sell them because people can sue you for that, but we got warned about that in college. But it's really great practice. And I think especially it's good for your mind just to think about like, oh, like how do like the head forms of different animals differ from like what I'm used to with proportions and people. Just really good questions. I think that especially like that repetition and practice can lead us to ask. Okay, so I'm rounding again. I'm almost to the edge of this border here. This is a long one. Completing the edging on each of these forms. I'm doing my best to do straight lines. I bet you are too, or you're rocking out with your ruler, one of the two. Either are great. Okay, cool. So, oh yes, we made it. We made it to the end. Love it. So my next step is going to be simply filling in all of the background space black. And just pay attention. I think sometimes people think like, oh, it's just the background, I'm going to go on autopilot, but no, this one sneaks up on you. And then all of a sudden you realize you've like colored 4 shapes, and that's me every day. So I'm going to start just from this corner and I'm going to work my way up into each of these sides here. I'm going to use just like a blank piece of my notebook as my buffer so that I can get all these edges really nice and dark. Let's see, I think there's another question here while we're kind of doing this drawing here. What do you find inspiration for drawing? What do you do to find inspiration for drawing? I often find myself not knowing what to draw or do for art. Ooh. That's a good question. I think one of the things that I do to constantly kind of stay inspired to make artwork is just to be observant in the world around me. I think my mom could tell you like, this is funny. From a very young age, she said like I would save these like candy wrappers from like Skittles and like I don't even know what other candies, probably like Twix or Snickers or something. I would save them in like a box underneath my bed because I loved the colors. And she asked me, she's like, Megan, why do you keep these? And I was like, because they're so pretty, Mommy. And so I think I would do something similar. My advice is not to become a hoarder, but my advice is to, like pay attention to the colors around you and textures and signs and design around you and kind of create like a little, it's like kind of like a memory box in a way. so that when you need ideas, or maybe you're feeling discouraged about some artwork, you can look back and see some examples that could inspire further artwork. So yeah, like if I see something on a menu that I think is super cool, or often it's like cracks in the pavement with like cute flowers and stuff. All sorts of like natural things. I'm inspired by plants all the time. So keeping like plants in my environment is one of the ways I stay inspired. Just kind of depends also what type of artwork you want to do, but that's probably some of the first pieces of advice I'd give for that question. It's a good question, and every artist does it really different. I think I told one of my art classes, we just studied, what was I reading? An article about a guy, an artist who spends his morning 2 hours every day reading the newspaper. I think that's awesome. So everybody kind of has a different artistic practice, but knowing what you need to stay inspired is super important. And then once you know, sticking with it and being faithful, I think is the advice I'd give you with that. Okay. And I would just say do like trial and error, like see like what works. And if something like you think it's going to work and it doesn't, like don't feel guilt about it. Just like go for it and ditch it if you need to. Because an artistic practice is something you have to develop and then sustain. And so if it's not doing you any good, then get rid of that and spend your energy on something more important. This would be my Enneagram 8 advice. Cool. We're continuing on the outside. We're flying through a couple questions here. Ooh, great question. How do you get better at drawing? Oh my goodness, this one came up twice. Yeah, the same rule applies. Practice, 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 forever and always. I think for me, I think I've gotten better at drawing just by like continuing to draw something different and something new. And then when I don't understand it, sorry, you can't even see me here. When I don't understand it, just making a decision to like keep working at it until it's done, which is just really hard. And sometimes it goes better than other times, but that's kind of my first piece of advice for that. Okay, cool. Finishing this last quadrant here, and then we'll talk about what happens when these shapes have overlapped into our space. Uh-oh. Okay, so here we are in this quadrant. We've successfully colored the entire background. So like pat on the back, if you're with me. And what we're gonna do now is we're gonna address what do we do when these shapes overlap? So essentially what we're gonna do is the opposite of what we did over here. On this side, we decided to outline those shapes. And for this one, we are simply going to fill in the tips where they intersect, and then make sure that this is where you have to just be like super delicate with your marker so that you don't get out of the lines, because here it's going to be really dynamic when you get it right. So let me show you a couple examples, and then you can go on your own. So let's start here on the tip. Again, we're going to let our marker hug the outside of the form, or the outside of the line, letting the ink of my marker go on the inside. And I'm just going really gently and then filling it in. So something like that. I'm going to continue that idea over here. Okay. Great. I'm just going to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, good. So now here we've got this giant shape that's taken up a lot of attention, but here's our line of division. So we have these forms, and I'm just going to put a dot in the middle of them because we know they get filled in black. Sometimes I do that to kind of mark my page so I know where I'm going. So again, I'm going to just trace along the line where it's dividing up our ideas. And again, do that same edging. Same edging. I also recommend when you're edging to just do lines drawing toward yourself. We draw the straightest lines when we're drawing towards our body. So I start with my marker away and towards like your torso, chest. That tends to help them just be a little bit more straight. And also I think besides just being straight, I feel like it kind of marks like where you are in the drawing a little bit easier. Okay, so I've got that first shape done here. I'm going to move over here. Again, letting the tip of your marker hug the outside of the line, and letting the actual like flesh of the marker hug the inside, so that way you get to use some of that ink. It also lets your outside lines be more precise, which we will always take. Okay, so we're continuing onward.
Here we go. Oh, I also just want to make a comment on the question about drawing because sometimes people say, and I've heard some of my students like over time say this, and it like breaks my heart because I don't want them to be judging themselves on how good they are at something. But some of my students will often say like, like I'm not good at drawing, so I'm not good at art. And I think that's a really great conversation because while that can be true for some other mediums, like drawing is not everything when it comes to artwork. And I would actually say, like, I'm not a drawer. I work primarily in 3D. And so if you're thinking, like, oh, I can't be an artist or I can't pursue art because I don't draw very well, like, I wouldn't just like count yourself out for that because I think God wires our minds all differently, and drawing is something that can be definitely learned. You might never be like amazing at it. I would say I will never probably be amazing at it, but I can still just like singing or just like learning to cook. You can always sort of start practicing, and then eventually you'll find it's just totally a skill. Granted, there are some people that are just born with the ability to just like draw people, and I'm not talking about those people right now. So that's sort of the advice I just wanted to cap off with that last one. Ooh, this is a good question. What tips do you have for appreciating art that isn't your style? Oh man, this is a hard question. Um, well, I'm going to practice what I preach because I tell my students there's always something you can appreciate in a piece of artwork, even if you don't love it. I think naturally, like being a graphic designer and like loving how we divide up space, I think one of the ways we can appreciate other people's artwork is by just noticing like if they followed certain design principles and how they've used color in those environments. How's texture used? Is it balanced? Does it evoke a sense of like emotion? I think those are like really good starter questions for trying to take a step of hospitality like towards the other person, even if you don't like love their artwork and wouldn't want to like put it in your home. I think there is something that you can like learn and take away. And this is not me saying all artwork is good because that's also not true. But I think when it comes to like, I'm kind of assuming the scenario for this one is like you're one-on-one with the person. So that's a really great way to just sort of, begin asking like, what was the intent? How did you make this? What was the process like? Explain to me more about where these ideas came from. Like, have you been thinking about this for a while, or what's kind of sparked this study for you? A lot of artists like do research, a lot of research, which most people don't know. And so that's one of the ways you can begin to appreciate their style too, is just tell me like, what's the process like? Don't invite them yourself to their studio, but say like, is there a time I could come and like see like what your workspace looks like? Most people tend to be pretty encouraged when you take a step towards like trying to understand. I had a friend from college say like, the biggest compliment you can ever do to me is like want to interact with my artwork. So I'll get off my artist soapbox for a minute and keep teaching here. So we've got this quadrant over here where we filled in the shapes. Over here, we've said, nah, we're going to fill in just the background. We are going to rotate. And here we are going to fill in the shapes again. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing because on this side of my border, I have filled in the inverted shapes. Now here, I'm going to say just the shapes get filled in. So just like we did earlier, we're going to do that edging, keeping with the same principle and filling in just the shapes. Where there are borders, consider where the larger shape is, and then edge accordingly, just like we did in the first one. Okay, so just like that. Okay, my tummy's grumbling. I guess I ate lunch kind of late, or had like breakfast lunch kind of early today. It was a bizarre day. Okay, but I graded some awesome artwork from my students. I loved it. How have you been spending your time in quarantine or wherever you are in the world? I hope you've been doing something creative amidst some of these routines, which we don't love, but we're settling into, huh? Okay, so again, with this big shape, I've outlined all of those forms. I'm gonna just, I call this with like babying your brain, like being nice to your brain, because your brain's trying to understand how these shapes interact and you're really messing with it. So if you know a shape gets filled in black, let's just fill it in and just be kind to ourselves. My flute teacher told me that. She would say whenever I get frustrated, she would say, baby your brain, be nice to it. Let's see how we can help you. And then we would repeat the part that was tricky really slow a couple times. She was a wonder. Love teachers like that. Great. let's see what other questions we got while we're filling in this shape here. What are good questions to think about when evaluating a piece of art? So we're changing verbs there. We went from appreciating to valuing. It's a really great question. I think it goes back to some of the questions that I mentioned before about sort of like what the process looks like. What is the artist trying to accomplish? How did they accomplish it? Who did they accomplish it with? For what purpose? Who paid? That's a big question. I always tell my students to ask that question. Whenever you look at a piece of artwork that's famous in history, you need to ask who paid, because it's always somebody who has a very specific opinion and agenda. Rarely do you find someone that says, just take my money and do art with whatever. So that's one of the questions when we visited the art museum just a couple weeks ago. That was one of the questions we talked about, because even Picasso, he was contracted by certain government groups to do artwork, which a lot of people don't necessarily realize. And by doing that, he did align himself with different political parties. He would never make a statement saying that he felt that way, but that's a good question when it comes to evaluating artwork, is who paid and why did they make it, and what was the process? What did it look like? I think if you look at a piece of artwork and you have ethical concerns, that should for sure weigh into how you evaluate it. Let's see if there's anything else that comes to my mind right off the bat. Let's see. I think in general, again, we're just going to continue filling in these shapes here, allowing the outside of our pen to be on the border, and then let the ink go on the inside. Great. Let's see here. What is your current favorite art medium? Ooh, that is a good question. I would say, oh man, I mean, clay is always my favorite. Clay and I, we understand each other, but I would say right now it is watercolor, which is hilarious because I would have never said that ever in a million years. But I'm going to just fill in this last shape here in this quadrant, and we'll keep moving. But recently, because I don't have many art materials in my house, because a lot of them are either at school or I had to leave them in the States, I've been doing a lot of watercolor drawings recently, and it's been such a joy. I have loved the mystery of how pigments kind of hang out with each other and blend and mix. Oh man, it's just beautiful. I love it. I love it. I think learning how to control it is what I'm in the process I'm in right now, and I really enjoy that challenge. It's nice to have something to like work at and see like tangible improvement. I think that's a really cool thing about watercolor. And then also with drawing, I think especially when you start to focus on something and begin to practice it, when you start seeing improvement, I feel like that's one of those super rewarding times to just kind of sit back and be like, oh my goodness, woohoo! Like praise Jesus, it can be learned, you know? Sweet. Favorite art medium. Love it, love it, love it. I'm gonna see if anybody else asks anything. If you have any other questions, let me know. Oh, let's see, we got a couple more. What's my next goal in artwork? Oh man. Before I answer that, we flip into the next quadrant. You know the rule. If they are across from each other, it's the same principle. So again, we're gonna outline the edges of all of these shapes, doing the background in black. So we'll keep going here while I answer this last question, which was talking about next goals. Oh man. Well, one of my next goals I can't share right now, but one of them I think has always been, I mean, I would love to exhibition like outside of a university setting. So that comes to mind as one of the first, like one of the ones I can share right now, probably. Probably one of the goals that I have. I would love to have a studio someday, and I think just personally, like I would love for every dish in my house someday to be something that I've made. I think that would be really cool. And that's my plan so far. You should ask my parents. They're holding a bunch of pottery at my house for me. God bless them. So there's that. Okay, again, we're just going to do the edging around all of these shapes. Because this border was so thin, I thought let's just fill it in, one of those baby your brain moments. And then this shape is actually really massive, so we're really not going to do a ton of work, at least on my paper, of filling in this background. I'm not sure what your shapes look like. Yours might be trickier than mine, but hopefully not too bad. So here we go. I'm just continuing to get each of these borders just nice and crisp and clean. Great. Let's see what the next question was on here. It says, what stresses you out most when you're creating something? Ooh, that's a really good question. I think expectations I put on myself, I know, I think after going through an art program in university, like I know what good art is for me. And I know in some ways like what some of my strongest work has been. And so to know that and not be able to like always reach that expectation can be what's really hard. Um, I think also like when someone else has an idea of what you should make and they carry weight in some way with the project, that can also, it can be great because it gives you direction, but it can also be a challenge because, you don't want to let them down, and you also, want them to like the work that you do. So it can be a double-edged sword for sure. But I will say, like, when I think back, I did some album artwork for my aunt once when she was releasing a new CD, and it was such a fun project because we're both musicians, and I got to like listen to the artwork that she was going to put on the CD, and then I got to be inspired by it in the process, and I just loved that. It was so cool, and just a really great way to kind of begin an artistic process. So that's probably a good version of that question would be expectations that were helpful. I think, yeah, probably just getting in my head, or especially with clay, like if I go into a session of like throwing a bunch of pots and like I'm already tired for the day, like your muscles are exhausted, like that's obviously going to impact your work. And the person who asked this is a dancer, so I know that you can identify with that. Like when you're already tired, and your muscles don't necessarily have the same type of control that you would like before a workout, that can be hard and impact like the creative process for sure, because you again, like what normal is and how it feels to be creating normally, and so to like not be up to par with like the expectations that you have with yourself can be disappointing for sure. At least that's how I feel. Yeah. So let's see. Is there anybody else that has any other questions? You can throw them in the comments. Let me know. Went through those faster than I expected, or maybe I just talk a mile a minute. Who knows? We got a couple more. Okay. Let's see. Favorite creative project, current or old ones? Oh, that's a really good question, Sid. Oh man. I think favorite creative project probably to date was like my final art exhibition in college, because I got to do everything the way that I wanted. And that sounds so like conceited and horrible, but when you have a vision in mind, and when you get to like actually execute on that and everything is in the place that it was supposed to be, there's something just like really satisfying about it. My show was you can look it up on my website too, which is linked in my profile, but it was essentially arrangements of like a whole room of arrangements of pots and shelves, and dealing with proportions and how stacking different forms and putting them distances apart, how that speaks to how space should be used and home should be used. It was really fun. Loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. That's probably my favorite project to date. Let's see. Biggest thing you've had to learn with trying new art mediums? Oh man, it's a really good question. Just to clarify before I dig into that, we got a couple other shapes that overlapped here. Remember that with this side, we're doing the background. So when shapes overlap, they're becoming part of the background, and we're going to fill in the middle of where they intersect. Okay. So as I speak to this next question, I just wanted to make sure we're all making artwork together. If you need help, biggest thing I've had to learn, I think. I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but just like withholding judgment on a specific piece for that amount of time and just letting it like totally flop, that's been something that's like really hard for me, especially when you know what you're capable of or what you feel like you should be capable of. So yeah, like going in and just saying like, I am gonna, and honestly, like just putting more basic expectations on yourself and just saying like, today I'm gonna figure out like how these colors mix and like what they do when they hang out together. And just being okay with like, maybe like just taking like smaller steps at a time and like letting that be enough. That's probably what I would say would be like something I've had to learn
what's hard about, oh man, I think I'm just having patience with yourself, especially in those newer processes when you're just kind of figuring out how different materials work. I feel like that's me every day, and I'm working with the same materials I've worked with since I was 4. But there's still a lot to learn, I think, and yeah, that totally inspires me. I think often when I have enough patience to sit through a process like that, I'm able to like really enjoy more of actually like creating with that new thing. So it's probably what I would say is my takeaway or what's needed when working with a new medium. And I'm sure it's different for everybody. If I was talking about like specifically like clay, my advice to you would be take some Advil before your first session and get ready for sore muscles, because you're not going to see results for a while. But when you do, it's going to be like the best day of your life, because for me, it just made so many things make sense about God, and him being a potter and forming and shaping our lives. But also, like, I think it's just a really cool way to connect with the earth God's given you, like through actually like getting your hands dirty and like holding clay. I think is just it can be a very humbling thing, which most people don't necessarily think about. But yeah, so here we go. We're gonna keep with all this edging here. I'm like getting really close to the end. I don't know how yours is going. Hopefully wonderful. If you have any other questions, you can feel free to throw some things in comments, or you can text me or whatever while we're still on live. Okay. Cool. I love how these turn out at the end. They just like mess with your eyes, which is just so cool. Okay, so here's the edge of that shape. Again, this is technically my background. Okay. And then filling those in with lines. Hopefully yours is going awesome. Okay, we're super close, y'all. Super close. Okay. Get into that corner there. And I have just 2 little overlap shapes left. We're looking really good. This is great. Well, this has been so fun. I've loved kind of hearing like what questions people might have with art. Art can be so mysterious, and I think sometimes artists aren't always great at explaining things with words. But I also think like we're called to give an answer for the things that we the hope that we have, and also just for me, that's been like the artwork I have. So it's cool to get to talk out some of these ideas. I'm gonna check to see if anybody else had any other questions. Feeling good. Maybe we just solved all of art's problems in one day. Maybe we did it. That'd be great. Okay, well, I just wrapped up our drawing here. This is just crazy overlapping of all these shapes and forms. It's almost like an X-ray, depending on which quadrant you're looking at. Here's my paper. Definitely not perfect, but I had a blast sort of just letting these shapes speak and overlap and hang out in one space. I want to thank you so much for joining me. This has been so fun doing Q&A with you and getting to know some of your ideas and your thoughts. It has been a true joy. If you have any other questions, now I'm available and around. If not, if you're in Spain, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon. And if you are in the States, have a killer day. Take care, everybody. Bye.